MSNBC had a debate about the University of California, Berkeley students protesting Bill Maher's upcoming graduation speech. So we have a representative of CARE, which is the Center on American and Islamic Relations, I believe it stands for. It's a Muslim civil rights group in the U.S., and he's debating a First Amendment lawyer. Let's listen.
Also in this year, it was the head of the IMF there was a disinvitation push against her, the chancellor of Berkeley, there was a disinvitation, even James Franco, there was a disinvitation push against him. And I mean, and what I'm saying is people always argue that there's a slippery slope, that when you start excluding speakers their point of view, it leads to this this problem, and it's getting worse every year.
Don't we have the right, the First Amendment right, to speak up and say, no, we don't want this person here? Isn't that a form of censorship, that you're supposed to sit quietly while a bigot is invited and honored and endorsed by the campus? We have the right to speak out as well.
You absolutely have the right to protest a speaker. My concern is that students and faculty members go first to, let's not have this person speak on campus, and that's intellectually unhealthy.
But that's not what we're saying. We're not saying don't have this person speak on campus. No, they're saying don't honor, don't endorse. If he came just on his own to speak on campus, who cares?
And that's not the case. In almost 50% of the 260 examples I'm talking about, they're just regular speeches that students are learning from examples like
about Bill Maher.
But let me, and that is to the point, bringing it back, Greg. I understand a broader conversation, you're absolutely right, but bringing it back to this specific petition with these specific remarks here, where do you stand on this case? And certainly you're right, this is a broader conversation to your point about, you know, being intellectually open, and because you disagree with what someone did or their stance, for example, Condoleezza Rice going back to the Rutgers, that does not mean the door should be closed. But with this specific example and some of the quotes there and the concerns, do you believe there's ever a valid time to have this conversation of whether or not, if someone is seen as a quote-unquote bigot, if they are needed at this commencement keynote address, or perhaps the university should pass? Is there ever an appropriate time to pass?
I mean, the fact that people so vehemently disagree with him is all the more reason to hear him out. And this is an art that I feel like is actually being lost on our campuses, where we really should be teaching people to at least hear people out or what they're going to say before you try to get them kicked off campus.
So if they invited the Grand Dragon of the KKK,
so Bill Maher is the Grand Dragon of the KKK? I can't wait till Bill Maher hears that. So Bill Maher is
we know that's not what he's saying, Greg.
They go on for a good 30 seconds to try to clarify, and the MSNBC host jumps in and says, no, that's not what he's saying. He's not saying that Bill Maher is comparable to a Grand Dragon of the KKK. But that's exactly what he said. That's exactly what he said. He's saying, well, look, so we can't stop Maher, so you're saying we wouldn't be able to stop a Grand Dragon of the KKK? How is that not making an analogy, making a comparison, trying to say it's a similar thing? That's exactly what you're doing. And that is absolutely, positively ridiculous. Look, here's the breakdown on this issue. We spoke a lot about it yesterday, but I wanted to come back today because there are some people who, I guess, didn't fully grasp my argument, or they disagree with it, and they're choosing to be evasive and not understand my argument. The guy argued from CARE, well, look, don't we have the First Amendment right to protest the speaker? Yeah, you do have the First Amendment right to do that. But if you're using your First Amendment rights to protest not just the speaker in the sense that you're saying, I disagree with him for reason X, Y, and Z, if you're using your First Amendment rights to protest Maher and say, we don't want you to be here at all, we want to censor you from even talking and giving your speech in the first place, you don't have the right to do that. You can protest him. You could say, hey, we disagree with your take on Islam. We disagree with your take on whatever it may be. You fill in the blank, vaccines, you name it. And it's fine. Go ahead. Do that all day long, and you're perfectly within your First Amendment rights. But if you're saying my First Amendment rights allow me to take away your First Amendment rights, well, then you're wrong. And then you're using a honestly a silly argument, and you're doing mental gymnastics to try to justify the fact that you're on the side of censorship, which, by the way, is a very right-wing thing to be in favor of. I love it when liberals get so liberal, or they get so tolerant that they tolerate intolerance, and that they say, in the name of tolerance, I will censor you and ban you from opening your mouth, which leads to my next point. They say, well, you don't understand. We just don't want Bill Maher to be honored and endorsed. It's not that he's speaking. It's just that we don't want him to be honored and endorsed. This is the same thing that a bunch of people said about the Ayan Hirsi Ali situation. They said, no, it's not that she's speaking. We don't care that she's speaking. It's about we don't want her to be honored and endorsed and to get an award. To which I respond, okay, if that's why you're upset, why the fuck are you not protesting only for that reason? Because they're not protesting for that reason. They say this is their cover story when they do the media circuit, but the actual protest, I know, I saw the fucking petition. The petition says we want to stop him from speaking. We don't want him to come here at all. That's what they're arguing for. If they wanted to argue for, we don't want him to get an honorary degree, we don't want him to get any kind of an award, we don't want him to be endorsed, but we still want to allow him to speak, fine. That's well within your First Amendment rights, and you can make that case all day long, and you wouldn't hear a peep of disagreement out of me. In fact, I'd probably praise you for being fair and nuanced in your style of protest. But you're claiming it's just about we don't want him to be honored, but then your petition says we actually want to censor him and not allow him to speak. So you're just lying about your purposes. And then finally, he thinks that's like a debate-ending fact about the KKK and the Grand Dragon or having an anti-Semite come and speak. But there's 2 points to make here. Number one is, just because somebody comes and speaks at a given institution, and especially if it's a public institution like we're dealing with here, a public university, it doesn't mean that it's an endorsement of every belief they've ever had and everything they've ever said. That's like saying when I allow somebody on my airwaves, when I do an interview with somebody on my airwaves, what? It's a tacit endorsement of that person? No, it's not. We've had a Democratic politician from Texas on the airwaves here. He disagreed with me on probably about 20% of things. We debated with Cenk before. We debated with Ed Schultz before. We've had many people on the show. We don't agree. Just because they're on my show doesn't mean it's endorsement of everything they believe. Just like if you have somebody speak at a public institution, you're not saying the public signs on to everything they believe. You're making leaps to come to that conclusion. That's point number one. And point number two is the KKK marched through a predominantly Jewish town and did a protest. And this was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court because people didn't want to allow them to march through. You know what the Supreme Court ruled? This is a non-issue. We don't even know why it's here. Guess what? Of course they have the right to do that. This is America. You can have the most contemptible, disgusting, grotesque beliefs, but you still have a right to say them, and you still have a right to bring them up, and you still have a right to do your march. And you know who defended the KKK in that case? The ACLU. So when people say, oh, it's a liberal organization, that's all they are. No. They are a civil liberties organization. They care only about civil liberties. And if that means defending the most rabid, disgusting right-wingers on the planet and hate speech people on the planet, well, guess what? They're going to do that because that's what civil liberties are about. If you only care about freedom of speech when it's for speech you like, you don't believe in freedom of speech at all. It's about protecting it when it's somebody you vehemently disagree with. And if the people in, I believe it was the Skokie case, if I'm not mistaken, but if the KKK could march through the middle of a predominantly Jewish town and have their First Amendment rights there, there's no reason why a guy like Bill Maher shouldn't be able to speak, who's liberal on 95% of issues. There's no reason why he shouldn't be able to speak at a public university without whiny little liberals bitching because they don't agree with him on absolutely everything. Sit down and learn a thing or two about actual liberal principles before you speak and make a fool of yourself.